Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 20th episode of the Tech Shift F9 podcast, a podcast dedicated to reinventing your career in the age of technology. And how do we do that? Well, we do that by interviewing some amazing professionals that share their experience, insights, and thoughts about how they pivoted their career into a new career. I'm your host, Maurizio Raffone, and this week I'm really excited about having Kaido Chiwata on the show. We continue the trends of sports related people that we have on the TSF9 podcast, as Kaido was a professional kickboxer, highly ranked in the super featherweight division at Rise. And since leaving the sport, he's pivoted into banking first, and now he's in Fintech. He's worked at companies like SMBC, HSBC, Stripe, and more, focusing on growth, user acquisition, and marketing. Hi, Kaido. Welcome to Tech Shift F9.
Hi.
Great having you with us today.
Oh, thank you for your making such a great opportunity. Appreciate it.
Fabulous. So, Kaido, you were a professional
hmm
kickboxer, and surely that took an incredible amount of time, effort, and commitment.
hmm
What drove your decision to give professional sports a go? Maybe what doubts did you have at the beginning of your journey? How did you get over them?
Yes. So actually, eventually, when I became a professional kickboxer, I was also a college student at Keio University in Tokyo that time. Before that, I had been playing rugby quite competitively for more than 10 years. And I was actually a member of the varsity rugby team at Keio University, but I wanted to try out something else, and I thought college would be the only chance I could try out something without caring about my taking care of my financial status. And that's the reason why went through several actually sports and utilizing my background in rugby. Actually, it was MMA I first started. And then I realized MMA in Japan was more for former wrestlers and judo players which I found it very hard to compete in grappling against them. So I wanted to improve my striking skills and realized that I had natural talents in kickboxing. Yeah, so that's why I got into kickboxing, yes. And yeah, made it up to become pro.
Fantastic. And
hmm
self-improvement, I think, is a fairly well understood path in the professional sports, particularly as you're
hmm
supported by trainers who are paid to get the
hmm
most out of you.
hmm
However, over time, did you develop a plan as to how you'd see yourself grow and improve? And what were some of the highlights and perhaps some of the lowlights with regards to progressing as a professional athlete?
Okay, it's a good question. Yeah, I guess especially in a fighting sport, there are strict weight divisions. Maintaining your weight and keeping up your performance is something very important. So for myself, but first of all, yeah, when I became a professional kickboxer, my goal was to become the champion in Japan all the time. So my day to day, week to week, month to month was quite well scheduled. Whenever there's a match, it took me about a month to prepare my weight condition. And so when you're during your weight cutting, it's also kind of risky to spar to go on sparring too hard. And I focus more on cutting my weight rather than doing hard sparring. But whenever I had the freedom of whatever, get enough energy and eat whatever I want, that was like the time I hardly focused on sparring and etc. So I guess it's all going backwards around from the goal. That was something I've been always focusing on fighting. And the good thing about fighting sports is a maximum you can do as a kickboxer is only about like 4 to 5 matches per year. There are some people who does like a month of fight, but that's quite tough. Once you get injured or hurt any part of your body, it takes about a few weeks to cure, and that'll just extend the term doing matches a bit. So yeah, I say yeah, being well prepared, having a good, quite clear schedule backwards from your goal is very important. A low light, I say, is probably because I was still young back then. I think so professional sport is quite tough. It's not if it's a well-established sports like soccer or was another like a baseball. It's quite easy. You just have to make it up to the top, and you get all the fame and money into yourself. But in a minor sports like kickboxing, it's also important to self-promote yourself. Nowadays, things like YouTube, podcasts, there's lots of ways to promote yourself in your original way. But back then, maybe if I wanted to become more famous or get more like attraction as a fighter, I could have done self promotion more actively and strategically. It's really hard to balance between your training and self promotion, but maybe that's something I could have done better to earn more money from fighting.
Fair enough. And Kaido, I have to ask, how did you go
Mhm.
from kicking people in the shins to being a sales and growth expert? I mean, do you beat up your prospective clients into submission? Joking aside,
Yeah.
yeah, please share with us the
Mhm.
key lessons
Mhm.
that being a professional athlete in a combat sport in particular gave you for your next step in your career.
Okay. I say in business and fighting, it's very similar. It's just thinking backwards from your goal and being clear on what task you have to clear up to win um, a certain goal or a target you set. In that sense, I think my experience as a professional athlete helped me a lot. But another thing, I think, if there are any listeners who are currently an athlete, pro or amateur, but like be doing it competitively, but can't like find any connections between professional career, I have one advice. Sports is something very fast and it's more continuous. You have to be consistent on building up your skills. And if you lose one match, that can be quite critical to destroy your career as an athlete. But in the world of business, I think there are sometimes you can't make progress or be that successful. But another thing is you can think flexible, and there are like many ways to actually be successful in the world of business. So like one failure, I don't think will lead to a critical failure. It's just you just have to keep on going to find like what path or what decision you may will give you the best.
It's interesting to see these parallels and the fact that you've
Hmm.
had to be in such a high pressure environment like professional sports, and
Hmm.
that sort of gave you that probably sixth sense to see
Hmm.
when you had to put the pedal to the metal and when
Hmm.
you perhaps had a little bit more time to strategize about your next steps.
Hmm.
But before we talk in more detail about your career pivot, I'm really curious to know about the people aspect of it. Because
Hmm.
how do you manage transitioning from training, which I think is something you do with a fairly limited group of people, with your trainers,
Hmm.
fellow
Hmm.
athletes,
Hmm.
to working with people in banks? And how did you, right? I mean, work on yourself to make that transition smoother, if at all?
Well, I guess that transition wasn't that smooth, so I wasn't able to stay in the traditional financing for a long time. But one thing, so okay, this is also another aspect of being an athlete. You so a a lifetime of an athlete is quite short. I think for kickboxing in general, most people retires in their like late 20s to like early 30s, and most of the reason is not just because of being injured or feeling tough to keep up with the physical work, but it's more like a financial issue, I think. So as an athlete, I realized that you know I wasn't generating any value that people will feel it worth paying to myself, and I didn't feel my like own market value as a person too. I think regardless of being an athlete or a business person or not, there's also always a market value that based on what kind of salary you can earn. And for me, I wanted to get out of the world and and get more new skill sets to be valuable, to be paid more. So in terms of transitioning from that small fighter world to the world of business, I wasn't that hesitant. Um, Especially the world of commercial banking was quite interesting because even though I was a young junior banker, I get to, so my counterpart and my clients are like executive people, CFOs, CEOs of, that time I was mainly covering SMEs, small to mid-sized enterprises companies, but people who has 10, 20 years more experience than myself. And we discuss about their most severe topic, which is their financial state. I think such an experience helped me a lot transitioning. Also, I was very like open to learn what they've experienced and what kind of like motivation they had to, build up their new business and services. So yeah, I think just being open-minded, be excited to learn new things from new kind of people is important. Um, on the other hand, when it comes to internal communication with people I met at the bank, that was something I had some struggle, I guess, because most people in the bank, they don't have experience like myself as an athlete. Well, some of them played sports, but they're more like following the rails, a typical rail that most Japanese like elite goes through, where they go to like a good school, they may be playing sports, doing some like extra curriculum activity, and then they move on to business and they have their like elite mindset, thinking himself like some kind of selected person. And it's just a bank at the end of the day. They basically, if you think it very simply, I'm not being offensive here, but it's just deposit, offering some way to transact funds and giving out loans. And I didn't feel much of, how do I say, like service or value they've added to their service. There's other ways to think for sure, but I thought you shouldn't think yourself as an elite, but that's a kind of thing I saw in a lot of people in the traditional finance scene. And yeah, for me, because I was more like a how do I say, outlaw guy from the fighting world, it was a bit of a struggle to adjust. Although I had some fine academic backgrounds working with those kind of people too in the past. Yeah.
It's interesting that you felt that they
Mm.
treated you differently and
Mhm.
made that transition a little bit harder perhaps. But what
Mm.
attracted you initially to traditional finance and commercial banking as your next career step?
When doing playing sports in parallel, I also had tried out for an experience to do internship, a European-based fighting event. They just came into Japan, so I was kind of helping out their Japan expansion. And I learned the instability, uncertainty of kickboxing as a business. So that's why how I got more interested into the world of business. But that time, I didn't have any specific industry I wanted to step in. And I felt like I should be more open on learning what kind of business and industries do exist in this world. And ideally to join some kind of industry that has a tailwind of growth happening to them. My biggest motivation joining a traditional commercial bank was just to learn about all kind of businesses, and especially to be able to understand like a life of a finance in a financial point of view. You be able to like understand corporates in an objective point of view. You be able to compare all kind of industries, to see kind of potentials, and that kind of analytical viewpoint I think helped me a lot when I got more specific into this industry. Yeah.
And as you moved into commercial
Mhm.
banking, traditional finance, I'm sure
Mhm.
you've been preparing yourself for that. But was there any aspect of this new career that took you by surprise and maybe something that you hadn't expected, but that turned out to be quite relevant?
Oh, first of all, the biggest surprise was the culture. SMBC is like one of the most traditional, conservative mega bank in Japan, and There was such a strong hierarchy, like age hierarchy, title hierarchy, like salaryman culture there. So that was something quite a gap, but interesting to me. But for now, I think that experience was quite relative and not bad at all because I get to understand like the normal or standard of Japan, or how like Japan became the country it is now. Now, I think there's a lot of data points, information online to learn Japan in how do I say, like in the surface, but to understand Japan from the heart is you need to like have an actual experience, like being in their culture, working day to day, understanding their mindset and etc. So that was something quite interesting, and I think now working out well because I'm more a Japan expansion manager in the fintech scene now.
Well, let's talk about that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
although it is a bit of an open-ended question, can you share with us how
Hmm.
your move to fintech came about and what made you do
Hmm.
it and how you got ready for it, if someone can be
Yes.
ready for that?
After I leave SMBC, I spent a short time at HSBC in a financial institutions group. Now, my expectation to HSBC was that it's a foreign company, so I thought there would be a more open-minded international environment there. But it was quite different than I expected when I joined that company. And that time, I got more interested in joining industry that's up to date, growing, like get to learn a lot of the latest stuff. And I guess for myself, because especially when I was in the bank, I was working as a relationship manager for SMEs. I wanted to be in an area that will, create some kind of services, products that's really meaningful for clients. And uh, unfortunately, the traditional legacy banks are just too big to make those kind of agile switches to services or values that clients really want. So I thought it would be good to join the world of fintech. Now, when you look into the world of fintech, there are all kinds of fintech, but for myself back then, the world of payment looked quite well because I think if you look at the Bank Act in Japan, banks are allowed to do these three main businesses. One is depositing, the second one is payment, and the third one is giving out loans. And deposit is really actually hard to like differentiate, and it's quite a regulated area. Loans, there are all kind of loans, but it also always comes with that risk or a sad aspect of loan, which sometimes company may go bankrupt and it may end up to like a sad conclusion of your client. Now, payment is something very thin and low margin, but I thought it was a win-win environment, win-win situation where the more better user experience or something useful you create, the transaction volume will grow, and it gives benefit for both the client and yourself. So I got really interested into the world of fintech, and luckily I was able to find this. Back then, now they are very large, but back then they were still quite new in Japan. A payment gateway called Stripe, and they were searching for a financial partnership manager who runs the partnership and facilitates the discussions with financial institutions partners in Japan. So yeah, I think I was quite lucky to find that role and fit in. So yeah, that's I think like wanting to switch to a world that focuses more on client experience and was my key motivation to switch into the world of fintech. Yep.
That's great. And how much of your time and effort is dedicated to learning how technology is evolving? And please, if you could share any
Mm-hmm.
approach that worked for you for the
Mm.
listeners, that'd be great.
For me, the best information. Well, first of all, fintech, especially in the world of payment, it's very different between countries. So, and Japan is rather a country that goes there on their original path. So there's lots of like initiatives that Japan may be copying other countries, but evolves in their original way. So first of all, something very important is to keep up with like what kind of regulatory changes will happen, especially in the tax scene, um, like financial operational scene, and those kind of things actually leads to social issues that fintech may solve in some way through their product. In order to like gather those kind of informations, what I watch is, well, first of all, I look into LinkedIn, and there's lots of like articles written by people, posts made by people about interesting like findings and etc. So LinkedIn is a great place, I think, to learn the latest payment scene, especially globally, not domestically. Now, when it comes to inside Japan, I think the penetration of LinkedIn is still quite low. So maybe medias or things I look for is there's just one YouTube channel called Pivot. I think they're like a new stream media where the former like manager at Newspix created it, and that um, Pivot YouTube channel is quite good to learn the like the latest scenes in this country. Um, and another place is I just meet people in person, go to like tech events, not just tech events, but like meet up with any like people in the tech scene. And I think that's where I, get those informations. Yep.
That's how we met. And
Yes, exactly.
many people working in traditional finance, I think, are
Mm,
considering potentially a move to fintech or even Web3. But based on your
mhm,
experience, is there any practical approach that you'd like to advise listeners to follow besides
mhm.
the usual, learn and network?
Okay, I think that really depends on like the level of experience you have. So for junior people, I think it's gonna be a slide into like a totally new grad or new like a junior role, but it may be relatively easier to switch from traditional finance to the world of fintech, Web3. For more experienced people, I think the expectation from the fintech side would be more based on what kind of skill sets you can offer. So it really depends on roles, but if you are someone more stronger in collecting funds or in the financing route to aim to become like a CFO or some kind of finance manager may be a path. If you have more strong experience in like planning or product, some kind of business development manager, product manager can be a road, but it'll really be depending on your experience. So maybe if I want to warn one thing to people, especially in the Japanese traditional financing, Japanese companies tends to grow their employees as a generalist, which is also a risk because by the time you've been spending like 10, 15 years in that organization, you'll just become a generalist who doesn't have a specific strength for yourself. So um, as soon as you feel some like risk that you're going through that generalist path and not having any specific skill set, I think that would be the good time to make a move to consider going out. Unless it may become very hard for yourself to make a transition, I believe.
That's great advice. And Kaido,
Hmm.
just to conclude, you're still relatively young and already have lots of experience under your belt.
Hmm.
Is there anything
Hmm.
about your future career that you're focusing on? And is there anything that makes you very excited?
Yeah, so I think for myself personally, I cut it off in more shorter terms. So in from the ongoing like 1 to 3 years, my main role is to bring in advanced fintech service or product into the Japanese market. One big issue I think I feel about the Japanese market is, especially in the fintech scene, is there hasn't been much foreign fintech companies who have very good products, quite advanced, useful, but like haven't come into Japan. I think the complexity of the regulation, the language barrier, the scarce talent pool, all those like reasons is kind of making those foreign fintech companies hesitant to come into this market. So bringing in something and making it quite, I think becoming number one in Japan may be quite tough, but become a good competitor to the local players in the market is something I would be very happy to do in the next 1 to 3 years. If I get get the credit of that experience. I think next step I'm curious is becoming more like an advisor or a consultant type of role. So there are several paths. One is probably becoming a personal consultant myself to fintech companies who want to enter the Japanese market. If there's good amount of demand, that may be good. But also another thing that interested me is some venture capitals actually have venture cap startup partners in their company, and I think for myself having a direct experience, leading a business, setting up strategies and goals and etc. may help a lot of especially the new to Japan or new brought up like fintech companies get advices or supports from myself. So that kind of role, I may be interested. But first of all, I think I have to make quite a success in bringing in a foreign fintech service into the Japanese market.
That sounds great. Kaido, loved having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed our chat with Kaido. Till next time, stay cool, stay positive.